when two students from the Magic Academy challenged each other to a duel. No one expected such an outcome. Gray unleashed a magical ether ball 100 times larger than his opponent's. If the professor hadn't intervened, the other student would have been completely obliterated. Looking at Gray, he couldn't understand how he gained such power. Never before had any student possessed such magical strength. But the truth is, Gray is a regressor, and he wasn't always this strong. Here's how his story started. It's the final battle between humanity's greatest heroes and their demonic foe. But this time, we're not following some glorified, overpowered hero. Instead, our protagonist is just another foot soldier, diligently doing his job. Being the lowly runt he is, a sharp stray laser blast rips straight through his chest. A hit so powerful that he doesn't even resist and just let it pass through. And that wraps up his story. In his final moments, he glances around at his fellow soldiers, dead and scattered across the battlefield. As for the so-called greatest heroes, well, they're locked in an intense clash against humanity's arch-nemesis, the Liquidator. Among the heroes are 4 brave warriors, each with unique traits and flashy powers. And then there are guys like our boy, foot soldiers, thrown in as sacrificial pawns. These guys are basically like NPCs, standing in a corner with no dialogue. Their purpose? Just die. He feels pathetic about himself, thinking how little he has contributed to this war. If only he had been born with some kind of talent. But as powerful as those heroes might be, they don't stand a chance either. The Liquidator slices through them like cucumbers. Literally, a single blow is all it took to wipe them out. Turns out that monster was just toying with his prey the whole time. Humanity's fate has finally been sealed. Or at least, that's what Grayleaf thought. Then he remembers. His heart has already been shredded into bits, and yet he's still not dead. Next thing he knows, he stands amidst the desolate ruins. Facing him is an all-powerful being, offering zero context for the unfolding chaos. This mysterious entity claims that Gray's body has miraculously healed. The astonishing part? He healed himself, using latent powers hidden deep within him all along. The entity further explains that Gray is actually far stronger than the Liquidator, the very villain, who mercilessly butchered countless heroes. However, he doubts if Gray can truly wield such immense power. So for the moment, the entity bestows upon our hero a fraction of his own strength, just enough to overpower the Liquidator. Back in the real world, Gray's sword is instantly enveloped by a mysterious energy, gifted by the all-powerful entity. Without hesitation, he puts this newfound energy to the test, to prove if it's truly potent or just an empty promise. Turns out, this power packs a devastating punch, so much so that even the Liquidator actually commends Gray for his sheer strength, but still not enough. As Gray lunges in for another strike, bam, he's brutally sliced in half, just like the others. Blood gushes from his bisected body as the Liquidator, oddly enough, praises him once more. Gray's the first to push the Liquidator so far that he actually had to go all out. But the Liquidator is in for another shocking surprise. Gray isn't done yet. That ominous black energy is fueling him. The entire lower half of his body, which was gone just a second ago, has now reformed, made entirely of pure dark energy. Bro's going full Black Clover mode. With that massive sword of his, it's a truly terrifying sight. To think that anyone could actually make the Liquidator falter. The enemy sees no other option than to summon a honeycomb shield to guard his pathetic self. Gray doesn't even look human anymore. He crashes down with his colossal blade, and the impact sends literal shockwaves tearing through the air. The shield shatters into glittering pieces, and Mr. Cocky ends up eating dirt, taking the full brunt of the hit. Now the bastard is seriously wondering if the thing he's fighting is even human at all. Hell, he's not even sure if Gray's still alive. Meanwhile, our boy is wondering the very same thing. But right now, all that truly matters is this fight. And yeah, this freak is tough as nails. But our boy is just as determined to do the math and break this bastard down. He's not stopping until this menace is erased. He throws another wild slash, and this creepy fuck starts bleeding this creepy golden blood. In response, the freak busts out some next-level jutsu and sprouts celestial wings. Looks like he's messing with time itself. Day turns into night, with the moon glowing like a spotlight from the gods. It's pretty impressive, and Gray admits it, but not impressive enough to shake his confidence. He goes full throttle, launching a preemptive strike straight at the liquidator's neck. But surprisingly, the sword doesn't pierce. There's some weird shield around him again. Then he starts yapping nonsense that flies straight over my head. Apparently, within this plane of true dusk, nothing can hurt him. Or at least, that's what this bastard claims. He tells Gray to look up at the sky, to see just how deep in shit he really is. Well, our boy looks up out of curiosity and sees a blinding, star-like thing glowing with insane intensity. Then boom, that thing crashes down like a damn meteor and obliterates Gray from existence. The liquidator stands victorious, staring down at the crater left behind. But thankfully, that mysterious entity from earlier shows up again, just in time to rewind everything and send our boy back into the past, with one sole mission, to save the world. By the way, that mystery man's name is Kronos, apparently. He and the liquidator have some kind of history, but no one is telling us what kind. So anyway, cut back to our boy, who opens his eyes in a peaceful, green neighborhood right after his regression. It's quiet, calm, and honestly pretty damn photogenic. Turns out he's in his hometown, Renato Village. Not just his hometown, but the past version of it. He's almost 15. Years in the past. Looks like Kronos kept his word. Gray's been sent back in time for one final shot at saving the world. A sudden, stinging pain crawls through his hand. When he glances down, he notices fresh wounds and bandages around his wrist. As he reflects, this was the darkest period of his life, when he was basically a literal punching bag for Belder and his gang. But now, with a fresh start, it'd be pathetic if he still ended up getting bullied. Then again, there's no way he could fight those guys head on. Bro's way out of their league, in hindsight. Even beating the liquidator sounds like a pipe dream. Anyway, he's got to figure out how to deal with these bullies, or he's doomed to relive the same suffering all over again. Seems like Bro can't catch a break. Or can he? He just so happens to stumble upon the very assholes he's been dreading the most. Of course, it's Belder and his goons. Since they've been bored lately, they've been on the hunt for our guy, eager to continue their tradition of good old-fashioned bullying, like it's their new religion. They toss a spare sword at his feet, ordering him to pick it up. Our boy stares at the sword, clueless. He still hasn't figured out what these goons are up to. After all, it's been 15 years, so memories are a bit hazy. Belder, meanwhile, assumes Gray is pretending to be clueless on purpose, so he's kind enough to remind him about their usual mock battles. Hearing that, Gray quickly tries to brush these pests off by pointing to his injured hand. He's grateful for the invite, but unfortunately, he can't join because the injury hasn't healed yet. But it looks like our boy can't shake these hobos unless he picks up the sword and fights. They even assure him the swords are totally blunt, so there's barely any chance of getting hurt. Gray, however, can't shake the feeling that injury is still possible. No matter how blunt the blade, it's still a lump of iron. One wrong hit in the wrong spot could book your one-way ticket to heaven. Well, he's got a point. One gentle tap on the balls, and you'll be doubled over on the ground in unbearable pain. But these guys don't seem to get the logic. Ignoring Gray's words, Belder takes a menacing stance, ready to strike. He absolutely hates hearing no from Gray. So, without hesitation, he charges like a raging bull, ready to kick off this duel. Gray barely has time to grab his sword, but it's too late. Belder is already charging him. Our boy Gray finds it utterly ridiculous that this dude even calls this a mock battle, while charging like he's absolutely furious at his own mother. That's when Gray suddenly remembers something a former military doctor once told him. The reason his swordsmanship never truly improved was because of a debilitating injury he sustained as a kid. Now, as he thinks about it, maybe this is the very injury that changed his life forever and forced him to live like a helpless runt. Belder comes crashing down with his massive blade, but Gray blurs away, expertly dodging the strike. Seriously though, even Gray himself is utterly shocked he managed to dodge it. Belder's face, meanwhile, tightens in annoyance at seeing such impressive agility, so he throws another strike, which my guy dodges again. Then a quick strike aimed at his feet is also easily avoided. This bastard's trying hard to tag our boy. He's like a bloodthirsty maniac on a mission, determined to take his opponent down. But Gray slips through like a ninja on cocaine. At first, Gray thought Belder was just being slow, but then a shocking realization hits him. It's not that Belder has gotten slow. It's he who has gotten faster. Bro is literally dodging every single strike like he owes rent. Even Belder's goons can't ignore what they're seeing. It's like Gray is a completely different person entirely. He might not have the body he once had, but he still has the memories of every battle he's ever fought. With all that experience intricately mapped in his head, his body is basically running on autopilot. He barely even has to try to dodge those strikes. Then Gray finally grabs his sword to keep this mock battle going, which definitely isn't feeling so mock anymore. Belder is absolutely drowning in his own ego, desperately trying to crush Gray under his blunt blade. But our guy has finally had enough. He swings his sword for the very first time. The sudden, jarring impact from his powerful swing leaves Belder's hand aching like hell. This just proves how utterly pathetic Belder truly is. To be honest, if Gray were to admit it, he actually feels like the real loser here, duking it out with such an utter weakling. But he also firmly believes that Belder doesn't deserve even an ounce of pity. He's the piece of trash who bullied Gray, stole his future, and caused him endless suffering. So, with all due disrespect, Gray is about to make Belder taste his own medicine. In his very next move, Gray effortlessly knocks the sword right out of Belder's trembling hand, instantly disarming him. While Belder can only stew in pure humiliation, Gray realizes this dude is even worse than he imagined. He seizes the chance to throw a sharp jab, mocking Belder's pathetic incompetence with a sword. Just one single blow sent Belder's sword flying. Then again, being unarmed isn't a huge problem. After all, Belder was the one who personally insisted these blunt blades were totally safe to use in a fight. Gray is now going absolutely feral. He's swinging the blade so fast it literally slices right through Belder's skin, causing blood to gush out profusely. As the sheer gravity of the situation sinks in, Belder's knees lose all strength and buckle under him. Wait a minute, Gray thought he was using a blunt blade. So how on earth did this bastard start bleeding? When he glances at his blade to confirm, he finds out it is indeed a blunt one. Though, if it had been a sharp sword, this dude might actually be dead by now. But let's not get distracted from the situation at hand. Gray swings the blade with brutal precision, knocking out multiple teeth and leaving Belder's nose bleeding like a geyser. Our guy is towering right over this bastard, practically giving him chills for life. It's always pretty amusing to see arrogant pieces of trash get rendered into sobbing, pathetic messes. It seems like this much pain is enough to humble Belder for the rest of his pathetic life. Oh well, looks like I spoke way too soon. This bastard still hasn't learned his damn lesson. He orders his pathetic goons to get our boy and whip his ass until he's a complete broken mess. The goons, however, hesitate to step forward for obvious reasons. They literally just watch their boss get beaten like a pathetic dog. So why would they just succumb to the same fate? Especially when they have the power to avoid it. One of the goons suggests they attack Gray in unison to overwhelm him. The trio quickly springs into action, surrounding our hero from every direction. Gray, however, is as nonchalant as ever. If these guys desperately want their death wish granted, our boy is more than ready. Everyone leaps at him, intending to finish him right here. At first, Gray had an ounce of sympathy for these chumps and had decided to spare them. But it looks like they won't stop until they learn their lesson. So he gives these gutter goblins what they truly deserve. Not long after, their faces are swollen like angry baboon backsides. After an unforgiving face massage, Once again, Gray finds it ridiculous that these crying emojis in human form used to be his worst nightmare. He recalls this group is currently students of Seria's swordsmanship dojo. Belder admits they are students of that dojo, though they haven't been visiting lately. Apparently, these soggy biscuits believed they were already powerful enough. Well, that's some pretty low standards for someone who's supposed to be strong enough. Not that Gray expects much from the dojo itself. He shows interest in joining the dojo, so he wants these goons to act as his referral. Belder refuses to fulfill the request. After all, he can't imagine the consequences. Once his master finds out he pathetically got his ass handed to him, Gray knows exactly how to deal with these guys. He merely swings his sword around, intimidating these suckers and hinting at the worst. That could happen if they don't listen. Funnily enough, this little threat works wonders. Belder is not only humbled, but that beatdown gave him the speed of a cheetah. He literally speeds down the road to reach the dojo as soon as possible, even leaving his friends behind. A while later, they enter the town. As they walk, Belder expresses his curiosity why Gray is interested in joining a dojo. It turns out this dojo holds a recommendation slot for the academy. Our boy doesn't need to say more. Knowing Belder is mature enough to grasp what his main goal truly is. One of the guys wonders why Gray even feels the need to join an academy when he's already so powerful. Enough. Little do these fools truly know, our guy doesn't set the bar anywhere near that low. He's got his own definition of enough. He vividly remembers the day all of humanity's heroes were slaughtered like pigs in the blink of an eye. And that was supposed to be the world's strongest lineup. Forget the heroes. Even he couldn't scratch that bastard, despite all the mysterious power he had. Only the gods know how much power will be enough to truly defeat that monster. Though he wasn't completely hopeless back then. The moment he gained those badass dark powers, he felt like an omnipotent being capable of destroying anything. The thing that held him back was a critical lack of swordsmanship skills. He had been relying on a few tricks he'd learned from the Sword Saint. If only he'd spent more time diligently training in swordsmanship, just like the Sword Saint did, he's certain he could have turned the tide of battle single-handedly. This is likely why Kronos sent him here to grind his ass off until he's worthy of wielding that dark, mysterious power. Again, a while later, we meet the master those goons were talking about. The group is getting an absolute earful for picking a fight with a random civilian. And what's even worse, all they got after challenging that civilian was a humiliating defeat. This intimidating woman is the swordsmanship dojo instructor, Seria. Belder tries to clarify, claiming they weren't actually trying to bully anyone. Oh no, it was just a mere mock battle. The poor bastard ends up taking a devastating blow for his lies, a hit so hard. Enough that he'd be on the moon. With this one-way ticket, his goons are shivering in absolute terror, wishing they could just survive this day. Nothing to be afraid of, guys. The stunt she just pulled was just a little lesson she wanted to teach these fools. If they call beating up someone unarmed a mock battle, then what she did also counts as a mock battle, right? She points her sword right at Belder's ugly face, immediately expelling him from the dojo. And he's not alone. His goons are joining him, too. With that, those pathetic goons gather their pathetic loser leader and exit pathetically. She immediately twirls around, settles onto her knees, and offers a sincere apology to her new recruit. It's on behalf of her former students, who caused him a whole lot of trouble. Our guy brushes off the apology, eager to get back to business. She's heard he's looking for a recommendation to the academy, which our guy readily affirms, especially after Belder and his second-rate team caused such a ruckus. She's willing to write that letter of recommendation for him, but before doing so, she wants him to prove his worth first. Both contestants stand ready, facing each other, wooden swords in hand. As the senior, she generously gives him the opportunity to strike first. And thus, the furious exchange of blows begins. They move so incredibly fast that literally, all they leave behind are blurring trails of silhouettes from their fearsome, lightning-quick strikes. All the while, Saria diligently does her job, which is to assess our boy's true capabilities. She can tell his swordsmanship is incredibly practical for his age. It's as if he's already been through countless battles. Now it makes perfect sense why those bozos got there but's handed to them by a single person. His style is mostly self-taught, but every so often, his swordplay looks strikingly similar to what's taught at the academy. This likely means someone probably did teach him, though his technique is still a bit rough around the edges. One thing's for sure, though. He's got an abundance of raw talent, just begging to be tapped and harnessed to its fullest potential. She's basically stumbled upon a diamond in the rough. Now that she's assessed him, she decides to end the duel with the very last blow she's about to deliver. Our guy braces himself, ready for it, and effortlessly parries her attack. This macabre dance once again begins. Our bro is literally parrying each and every one of her attacks, like he's completely allergic to damage. This prompts the woman to grow increasingly anxious. The utter lack of hesitation on his side is totally throwing her off. It's like no attack she tries can even falter his stance. Heck, she even starts to feel annoyed at herself, to think she has to give her absolute all in what's supposed to be a battle meant only to gauge our young hero's capabilities. She's so overwhelmed she starts feeling true fear for a moment. He looks like some demonic entity about to unleash something massive. After barely surviving our guy's last effortless swing, she realizes it was just a wild swing. After that wild swing, Gray starts to feel tired as his energy plummets. The woman sees him sulking and mistakes it for a weakness, so she lunges like a feisty cat, only to find herself checkmated right on the spot. The tables have completely flipped on her. The broken wooden sword hits the ground, while Gray finds himself stumped for a second. He found his way back to the same dark power he received during his battle against the Liquidator. The fact that he used a hint of that same power now means he still has access to his abilities, even after regressing into the past. But then it happens. An agonizing drawback engulfs his body with so much pain that he drops to his knees. He can't even hold himself upright, while Saria is alarmed by his condition and wants to help. Even after using a fraction of his power, Gray realizes that his current body is still unable to exhibit his abilities. Still, he musters the determination to stand on his feet again, despite his body quivering. After telling her that he's okay, Gray finds himself lost in his thoughts, realizing he can hardly stand. This emphasizes just how efficient he's going to have to be with his abilities. Oh, he's also thinking about revealing the information about his power to the experienced sword master in front of him. Saria just looks at him, utterly lost and confused. Meanwhile, our boy assesses the situation with a clear head and concludes that he shouldn't tell anyone about what happened. After all, who would ever believe his ridiculous story? And it's not like he can control his dark powers. How will it demonstrate what he means? Bearing that in mind, he comes up with an innocent excuse that he simply overexerted himself. Yet the sword master, she doesn't believe him for a single second. She finds his excuse absolutely ridiculous, because there's no way he could have sliced her wooden sword when they were fighting with dull weapons in the first place. He's clever enough for her to understand that Gray is definitely hiding something from her. Virgil's daughter, undeterred, points her broken sword towards our boy, causing Gray to inquire if there's an issue. From his reaction, it's clear she understands that he doesn't want to discuss anything for now. Instead of challenging him on it, she respects his decision and asks about his initial interest in getting a recommendation to the academy. Our boy confirms this, sharing that he heard she could help him with that. Saria doesn't deny it either. She emphasizes that with just her authority, she can help him get a recommendation to the Royal Academy of Swordsmanship, the best educational institution their kingdom has to offer. Surprisingly, however, she shares no interest in recommending him for that institution, adding that Gray is an unfit person for the academy. Her cold words stabbed him sharper than any blade. Gray starts beating himself up Inside, doubting his abilities and admitting that he's too weak. His final attack was the only remarkable thing he'd done in that battle. But wait, Saria isn't finished talking. She continues her thoughts, arguing that instead of going to the Royal Academy, the kid should instead head to the World Union Academy. What a plot twist that is. The revelation hits him harder than Truckquin, hitting his Ice Sky victims. Though the Royal Academy is their country's finest, the World Union Academy is the best in the entire world. The institution is deemed the pinnacle of sword mastery. Gray's at a loss for words because this same academy is responsible for producing the strongest battle squad, including the likes of Sword Saint Amy. He immediately confronts Saria, questioning if he's even qualified to attend, to get into a prestigious institution like that. But hilariously enough, the girl completely shatters his expectations. She's quick to point out that, as he is right now, he doesn't stand a ghost of a chance of even getting past the entrance. The sword master already knows that even Gray is incredibly wary of his own major shortcomings, especially when it comes to his truly pathetic current stick-thin body. When it comes to something like the Royal Academy, the kid might be able to pull off a miracle based purely on his incredible sword skills alone, but that's absolutely not the case for the World Union Academy, though. So yeah, our dude is utterly screwed if he doesn't train his butt off. Even Saria herself is completely astonished. This kid possesses miraculous talent in his swordplay, and yet he's got the body of a literal stick figure. Doubt is seriously starting to creep in, genuinely making Gray worry about the monstrous opponents he'll have to face. In the World Union Academy, it's definitely not going to be a walk in the park. And with his current physique, that's totally out of the question anyway. Seeing his utterly sorrowful state, Saria immediately points out how quickly he's given up, even though there are a full 9 months until the Academy's entrance exam. Again, completely underconfident in his abilities, Gray thinks even that much time won't be enough for him. Despite her best efforts to encourage him, even Saria agrees that it's a very short amount of time. But even then, she offers him a desperate chance. The sword master wants him to implicitly trust her for the next 9 months, because during this intense period, she's going to make him suffer through absolute hell and back. Yeah, something tells me she's going to hire David Goggins and make this guy run 3 insane ultramarathons and do 6,000 pull-ups, by the way. Gray admits that, though he absolutely doesn't want to suffer, he has no other choice. So, declaring himself ready, he desperately hopes that the sword master will take excellent care of him. Saria actually takes a liking to his forward determination. At first, you guys probably think this is a good sign, that they're starting off on such a positive note. But the atmosphere immediately switches to total, utter fear as Virgil's daughter officially. His grueling, hellish training officially kicks off. Gray's agonizing trials are now underway. He trained like Goku, and honestly, he was eating like him too. She's definitely putting him through a serious bulking phase. He also had to deal with some seriously questionable food, but his teacher remained absolutely unrelenting, and she put him through absolutely everything. Their sword duels continued just the same. The entire goal was to truly hone his techniques. And then just like that, 8 months zipped by. Congrats to Gray for earning that impressive shredded body after enduring all that incredibly long training. Even Saria herself is out here admiring his killer physique. Now that they've reached this point, she's got nothing left in her arsenal to offer him. He's finally ready to head out into the real world now. But her unusually easygoing attitude completely confuses Gray, because there's still an entire month left to go until the upcoming entrance exam. Virgil's daughter reminds our boy he'll spend a lot of time traveling to the entrance exam, which is why he absolutely has to leave early. As a final, heartfelt token of gratitude, Saria hands him a hefty bag of money, ensuring he'll have a super easygoing trip, taking care of all his expenses for the entire month. Now that's what I call a real teacher. But as for our boy, he still doesn't feel good about the idea of leaving so soon. Her forceful approach genuinely saddens him, because he thinks his teacher is actively pushing him away, almost like he's a burden. But smiling at his answer, she thinks he's just seriously complicating the situation. Suddenly, Gray brings up the rumor of an ogre's nest nearby, immediately grabbing Saria's attention. He also points out that the village is completely unsafe with the shocking lack of security guards. The Sword Master confirms the nest's existence as well, as it was only just discovered recently. At the same time, she offers him a reassuring smile, believing that absolutely nothing bad will happen. If the worst-case scenario happens, they'll just have to rely on the royal capital for help. Though Gray, on the other hand, is still clearly worried. She thinks his only focus should be to take his exam, without any wandering thoughts clouding his mind. But he's convinced as hell that his teacher is lying to him, soothing him so he doesn't have to worry. The royal capital is never going to send help to a tiny village like this. And when this village inevitably gets raided and destroyed by the ogres, it will inevitably, which led to Saria's brutal demise in his original life. He had learned she died taking on that battle all by herself. But anyway, he keeps all this from her, simply accepting the current situation. He thanks his teacher for helping him throughout this time. Gray plans to leave right away, which earns Saria's smile. Both she and her two distinct personalities are rooting for him to pass. Just a few days later, we see her traversing a truly dangerous path to make her way toward the nest. Here, the skeletal remains of humans are horrifically hung on the trees as a grim warning. Saria is trying to track down the nest, using the information she'd received from the scouts, spotting a fresh trail of blood ahead. She knows that great danger lurks ahead. But before she can even do anything, the Sword Master is suddenly alarmed by the familiar voice of her very own disciple. Sitting casually atop a tree branch, he questions where his beloved master is headed so late at night. Surprised by his sudden entrance, she asks what he's doing here when he's supposed to be focusing on the academy, sticking his perfect landing on the ground. He taunts her for questioning him, when he should be questioning her instead. She lied to him, saying she would ignore the situation at the nest and let the royal capital handle it. Making an excuse, Saria explains that the royal capital refused to come because of their own personal matters, which is why she took on the job herself. She's confident in her exceptional sword ability, believing that whatever lurks in that nest, she can easily defeat it, especially after receiving the scout's report. Saria then reveals that her main opponent will be an elite ogre, along with its henchmen monsters, numbering roughly 50 creatures, not counting the boss. She knows fighting off these monsters will be tough due to their sheer numbers, but it's certainly not stopping her from going. By the way, even Gray admits that an elite ogre isn't particularly strong, at least not strong enough to defeat a woman of her caliber. However, the true thing about ogres is that their unique advantage comes from their brains and their overwhelming numbers. With so many of them in that nest area is definitely going to die if they manage to surround and overwhelm her. Apart from that, our boy knows one thing with absolute confidence because of his knowledge of his previous life. Letting Saria take on the mission alone is like sending her to her death, and in the end, the village will also be destroyed with no protector left. That's the dark future that he's already experienced before. With that in mind, the young disciple requests to team up with her. But his master isn't kind, stating that she's all good on her own, instead of wasting time trying to convince her that she won't be enough. Gray cleverly tells her that he wants to gain real combat experience. He even goes on to guilt trip her, asking if she's afraid he'll become a burden in her path, though he's smart. His master points out the ridiculousness of what he just said. Their skill difference is nearly identical right now, to the point that she struggles to fight him during their mock battles. Even with that fact in consideration, Saria reminds her disciple that a real battle is much more different, especially when you account for a monstrous nest like this one. This task involves immense danger, which is the reason she doesn't want Gray to risk his life. At least not until he has more combat experience. Her disciple is devastated to hear her conviction. After all, Saria wasn't budging in her stance, so he goes for one last resort, an idea that he wants to share with his master. At first she's surprised, until Gray straight up challenges her to a fight, promising to put her to sleep, and then going on by himself. To face the ogre, the situation grows tense. The disciple has just challenged his master to a real battle. His sword pointed at her, Gray awaits for her response. Realizing that her student is just as stubborn as she is, Saria admits defeat. She doesn't want him to go on alone, so she reverts to his previous suggestion of going together. All she cares about is that he returns in one piece. And yes, the one piece is real. Both of them band together. They venture deep into the forest, ready to confront the lurking monsters. As the night deepens, the master and disciple duo, pinpoint the monster's nest. These intelligent monsters expertly use their environment to their advantage. They've crafted a nest with no escape routes, just in case anyone dared to venture this far to challenge them. Saria believes the creatures must be overconfident, while Gray argues that it's actually a massive disadvantage for them, as they'll need to fight cautiously. Observing from a distance, she's surprised. The boss monster is nowhere in sight, making her wonder if it's hiding in its tent. If that's the case, it's perfect for them, because this way, they can take down many henchmen before the elite ogre confronts them. Discussing their battle strategy, Saria instructs her student to target the monsters from one side, while she covers the other. Executing the plan instantly, both bolt into action, swords in hand. The showdown begins before the monsters even comprehend what's happening. The majestic Saria is already on top of them, executing a clean headshot, turning the creature's head into a football as it flops to the ground. With the first monster down, the others grumble and roar at each other in their monstrous language. The entire group is enraged, immediately going into murder mode, preparing their weapons to butcher the intruders. But it doesn't matter, as our boy is going full beast mode, utterly slaughtering the horde. This guy is a literal one-man army, cross-cutting multiple monsters all at once. Meanwhile, the elegant Saria is just as impressive, showing off the skills she learned from her Papa Virgil. These two are absolutely unstoppable. Gray and Saria perfectly cover each other's backs within a span of mere minutes. Every single monster in sight is reduced to nothing but a body count. She's genuinely impressed by Gray's unflinching determination in a real battle. He's never felt more prepared, warning his master to stay on her guard too. But here's the catch. Something about the situation feels deeply wrong. This fight has been far too easy for them. Way too easy, in fact. Because if this is the level Saria had to face, then she could have defeated all of them herself, even without his help. And that truly unnerves him. Because whatever lurks inside that tent, it's going to be far more terrifying than anything they've faced so far. Speaking of which, the creature's sheer menace. A pair of eyes beams through the dark tent, glaring at him from afar. The second Gray's eyes meet the creature's. He shudders in shock despite his strength. He cowers, desperately telling his master that they have to leave immediately. Even Saria doesn't get what's gotten into him all of a sudden. Without explaining anything, he roars at her to run, with so much fear in his voice that Saria doesn't question him. She simply follows his instructions and bolts right after him. As they're running along, you might think they'll escape, but nope, because their terrifying opponent suddenly leaps over from the skies with a massive vertical jump. Gray is terrified when a monster plants its feet into the ground, confronting the stunned humans. Saria's expression twists into pure shock, pointing out that the boss monster has personally come for a battle. But then Gray drops a bombshell that no one even expected. This isn't the boss monster at all. Right as he's about to reveal the real boss's location, a monstrous voice roars at them from behind. This provocative roar unleashes another horde of creatures to chase after them. The terrifying noise is deafening for Saria, but for the ogres, it has transformed them into battle-hungry maniacs. Saria shivers in fear, unable to comprehend her own senses. There's a creature even more terrifying, broodier than elite ogre, even, and it's finally commanding the entire group. Gray reveals they're up against an ogre general. He's the true boss of this monster nest. Let me just remind you all, they're literally sandwiched right now on one side There's the elite ogre blocking their escape route. Going back isn't an option. Not an option either, because a large horde awaits them, along with the true boss of the nest. Saria is utterly shocked, knowing they can't face a monster like this, even at their level. Their only shot at victory is to kill the elite ogre in front of them to escape. So she does exactly that, by charging at the beast and clashing her weapon against his, utterly determined to win this battle. She exploits an opening and lands a sharp cut against the creature's massive body. Blood spurts from the cut, and while normally this would be a good sign, her worries, however, only worsen when she notices the wound is healing again. Meanwhile, our boy is clashing against dozens of monsters, all on his own, sharing his knowledge of the Ogre General's abilities. And apparently, its roar significantly boosts the strength and recovery speed of all the monsters. Basically, they're up against an elite ogre on steroids. Defeating even a normal one is so difficult right now that even Gray is having a tough time slashing down one of the monsters. He tells Saria to cover his back, instructing her to just delay the battle for a while longer, which makes her question what kind of miraculous strategies he has planned. To that, our boy shares that in a situation like this, they've only got one objective in sight, and that is to kill the ugliest of them all, the bastard who's hiding behind his horde. The fight for survival begins, as Gray clashes his sword against one of the monsters, reflecting his deep frustration. Annoyance at getting surrounded and flanked. He deflects the slash and finds another raging monster aiming right at him. He's cutting past the enemies, focusing on making a clear path so he can get to his objective. Carelessness, however, he uses so much strength that it literally, his blade shatters to bits. This is a serious setback as he's now left without his most trusted weapon. He dodges the enhanced ogre's downward slash and quickly focuses his attention on drawing out his spare sword. Smart. Now that's the smartest main character I've seen in ages. Carrying a second sword means always being prepared. Gray worries his new blade won't hold up for long. Coming to his rescue, his master tosses her spare sword his way, giving him yet another chance at victory. With both spare swords in hand, he has a better fighting chance. But even so, this won't be enough to wipe out every single one of these monsters. There's just too much resistance in getting to the Ogre General while also defeating its minions. Trusting his abilities, this man goes absolutely wild, unleashing blindingly fast slashes across his enemies. His forward momentum is halted when one of the ogres attempts to attack him. Luckily, he dodges and then quickly blocks the attack. This fight is fatiguing him, but he's still made significant progress dealing with the monsters before him. The Ogre General senses danger and unleashes a second, monstrous roar. To Gray's horror, the strengthened creatures have just received yet another boost in strength. This guy is having a miserable time, as he's struggling even more now to deal with them. Gray realizes the Ogre General is intelligent enough to see through his strategy. Now that it knows what Gray is trying to do, the Ogre General keeps on, roaring to provoke its minions to fight. Blocking one of the strikes, Gray pushes past the monsters to bolt right ahead. A horde of monsters is ready to welcome him. Instead of facing off every single one, he efficiently cuts through the ones that are directly in his way. But even that leaves him with scratches and injuries all over his body. The bloodbath is wearing him down as he struggles to sprint past their endless barrage of attacks. Letting his guard down, he gets tackled by one of the ogres and pinned into place. Things are looking grim for him as the ogres have him exactly where they want him. Luckily, in their enraged frenzy, they've completely lost their sense of cooperation. One even blindly slashes through one of its own kind without a second thought. Gray internalizes that their strategy is likely to weaken his swords. While he's lost in thought, a gigachad ogre loads up a powerful fist, aiming to crush his head. It's a do-or-die situation, and he clearly cannot afford to be hit. So, he uses his sword to mitigate the damage. But even then, our bro is launched into the ground with a heavy crash. Just from impact force alone, he finds himself at the very edge of his life. Yet, this man still tries to get up, even in his broken state. Now that's the definition of a true badass. With the previous attack having destroyed his spare sword, now he only has one sword left. And dozens of ogres to slay, plus their boss. Once more, the situation is not in his favor. In fact, it's nearly impossible to get out of this alive. Despite experiencing a regression, he fully understands the situation right now. Grace simply cannot win. Not against so many bloodthirsty monsters. Wear him down. So, he decides to switch his battle strategy, roaring at his master to run away while he can, offering to make himself a decoy for her escape. Saria hears this and smiles, refusing to treat him like that. She's still facing off against the strongest elite ogre, but Gray doesn't get why she's still determined to fight. He assures her to run away, promising he'll catch up soon after. But Saria horrifically refuses his suggestion, revealing that she has lost her ability to run. She suffered a major gash on her thigh, reducing Gray's hopes to ashes. Even that approach is now out of the question. There's no other path left, except marching forward to his death, swinging his blade in fury. He thinks about the reason why he regressed, despite bearing such a heavy purpose. All of it is about to come to a tragic end. Our boy's final sword also chips and shatters to pieces, and yet he finds himself in denial, despite having lost his weapon. Gray refuses to consider this the ending to his life. If only he can use the power from the future, the terrifying ability that matched the liquidator and was able to harm him. If he can use it even for a moment, then these monsters will be severed to pieces. Strongly envisioning the feeling he experienced that time, he loads his broken sword, entering a meditative state. And when he reopens his eyes, Gray is no longer the same weakling he was before. A single dark burning slash eviscerates the ogres, turning them to ashes with his burning black sword. Even Saria doesn't get what's going on, but it appears that our boy is still under control, as even after tapping into his dark powers, he gives her a smile of relief in the next few seconds. Gray cuts every single creature in his sight, including the ogre general, even his master. Can't comprehend what the hell just happened. He's too busy having to focus on the elite ogre in front of her. But now that the ogre general is killed, the strengthening abilities seem to have worn off. Saria understands that now. She can easily kill the beast, as it no longer has any capabilities to regenerate. Using a Walmart version of Judgment Cut End, she cuts the creature down, declaring that the elite ogre is nothing without its master. They won at last. Both of them managed to stand against all the odds, and won the fight despite having miraculously pummeled through an entire horde of ogres. Gray still apologizes for breaking her sword. Saria tells him that it's nothing compared to saving her life. In exchange, he collects the sword and wants to confront him for the technique he pulled at the end. But before she can finish her sentence, our boy flops to the ground, knocked fully unconscious because of the after effects, leaving his master to shout his name in concern. The perspective cuts to the inner mind of Gray. He questions his surroundings and spots nothing but a chained, floating door in front of him. He's confused until the door releases the same dark energy he uses himself, all through his powerful ability. A shocking realization suddenly dawns on him. Could this really be his very own power? He wonders. What would happen if he could just break this door open? After all, he might just obtain the ultimate power and make it completely his own. Determined to try, he marches bravely forward. But the moment he takes his very first step, a deathly, suffocating sensation looms over his body, frightening the living daylights right out of him. And that's after taking only one single step. Gray is completely paralyzed with terror as he quickly retreats his way back. He doesn't have all the answers yet, especially regarding the source of his power. But one thing has just been made crystal clear to him. If he dares to provoke the use of these powers in his current state, there's no doubt in hell he'll die. And that's not just some light, baseless claim, because the feeling is so utterly horrific that it drives him to tears. From the void, a mysterious voice creeps into his mind, commending him for his wise decision just now. Before Gray can process it any further, he wakes up in a panicked state, right in his bed. His master is right there beside him, so glad that he's finally awake. Worried, he asks where he's at. She explains that she brought him to the village infirmary as fast as she possibly could. This dude was actually knocked out for 5 whole days, and I'm so glad the author didn't say 3 days, like all the other stories out there. Anyway, she was truly afraid for his life. Gray has to cope with the fact he needed nearly a week to recover, all because of the insane burden of the technique he used. Even Saria herself thinks he went absolutely above and beyond in that battle. It was the very definition of defying all odds. Still, she's concerned about the state of his body and asks if he's capable of moving well. To test it out, our boy tries to lift his arm, but he can't do jack squat. He can barely use it after expending so much energy. But with the way he is right now, there's no way he can hold a sword with an injury like this. Well, actually, there's no way he'd ever be able to rub one off either. He needs to fix this problem fast. Then there's the nasty bruise on his arm, a souvenir from the recent battle. Saria grows increasingly concerned about his condition, knowing he can barely move his body. Gray confirms he's utterly helpless right now. Even his master admits that his arm won't return to normal anytime soon, revealing that every single bone in his arm has been shattered to pieces. This shocking revelation completely stuns our boy because, strangely, he doesn't feel any pain. That's actually thanks to the incredible magic potion treatment he received. Our boy's jaw practically hits the floor because these potions are supposed to be incredibly expensive, and she just used one on him. Saria calmly explains that it's nothing to worry about, as the village chief personally rewarded them with it. The kid can't believe what he's hearing. He doesn't even know the village chief personally, yet he's received a priceless magic potion at his expense. Saria thinks he's a bit dense for failing to grasp his own situation. So she puts in bold words, Gray is officially the savior and the hero of the village. Before he can even grapple with what she just said, the village chief himself barges in to greet the boy, profusely thanking him for everything. To emphasize the sheer greatness of his feat, the village chief reminds the kid that an ogre general is so incredibly strong that it takes an entire town to fight against even one. That kind of creature threatened their village. And yet one boy was able to pummel his way through, carving a path of destruction and killing the monster, ensuring the village's safety. For that, the village chief is eternally grateful. It's all thanks to the valiant efforts of both the boy and his master, that their lives are no longer threatened. Unable to accept all the credit, Gray argues that they're exaggerating what he did. But the village chief thinks it's him who is undermining his own actions. Thinking about it for a moment, Gray reflects on the astonishing outcome. He thinks that maybe the village chief's words are right. Remember his previous life? In that life, this village was utterly razed by rampaging ogres, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. This highlights the sheer scale of his achievement. The village chief would love to give him a lengthy explanation of his astounding feats, but for now, his attention is on Gray's crucial mission, passing the entrance exam for the World Union Academy. All right, Gray just remembered his true objective. He foolishly went off to battle creatures in a monster nest only weeks before his crucial exam. Considering all that precious time wasted, he's only got 2 days left until D-Day, until the exam. Oh, and on top of that, just getting there takes a grueling 3 days on foot. His only viable option is a horse to cover the distance in time, but he's absolutely broke and can't afford one. So, with a sudden request, he desperately begs the village chief to lend him a horse for his journey. Luckily, the chief had already anticipated Gray's request, which is why he's already prepared the finest horse for his travels. Saria smiles, revealing their original plan was to carry him, even if he hadn't woken up today. Some people genuinely support you, no matter your struggles, just like Gray's incredible friends here. May we all encounter more such people in our lives. Gray exits the infirmary, only to find the whole village roaring his name, wholeheartedly rooting for his exam. They urge him to do his absolute best, and are not afraid to thank him for his heroic deeds. The villagers even provide him with a hefty bag of money. Everyone donated bit by bit, so he can apply for the entrance exam and support himself once he's at the academy. The boy is eternally grateful to the villagers, who showed him such immense love and support. He also jokingly says that it'll be incredibly embarrassing if he fails and has to come back. But Saria remains absurdly confident in her student, emphasizing that the other applicants for the entrance exam aren't capable of beating an ogre. General, all on their own, but that's not his only concern. Gray is worried about his arm, as it's still messed up and there's no telling when it will fully heal. His master, however, argues back, insisting he should use his left arm in the meantime. Even though his left arm is perfectly functional, he's simply more accustomed to using his right. But his teacher believes that with his current skill level, it won't make a difference. Gray shares his concerns, explaining that the entrance exam's difficulty might be too overwhelming, especially with one arm. One arm could hinder him, but even then, Saria understands perfectly that the academy's teachers or examiners have a sharp eye. When they see his talent, they'll surely select him. The boy then mounts his horse, while his teacher confidently declares he's going to pass. That's the only outcome. Thanking her for everything she's done, he promises not to fail, recalling how his village was razed to the ground in his previous life. He's happy these people got a second chance. Alongside him, the world is already changing from this moment onwards, and he's going to make sure to influence the future with his new power. In the next scene, our boy finally makes his way to his destination. Staring ahead, he locks eyes with the grandeur of the World Union Academy. In the arena, the examiner announces the distribution of the exam tickets. All the candidates will remain in the arena. From the looks of it, there's a massive number of applicants, but only a tiny 20 will reserve a spot in class. They bicker about the changing number of seats each year because in some years, the academy even accepted 50 people, while in rare cases, it only accepted one. So the rules for selection aren't absolute, apparently. Anyway, Professor Ariel takes the limelight and steps to the front. She addresses the examinees and explains that they'll have to collect the paper being presented. With a snap of her fingers, a vortex of yellow opens, releasing magical energy and automatically manifesting the tickets in each examinee's hand. Our boy collects his ticket. His examinee number is 513 for the fencing course. Professor Ariel adds that their ticket only shares the most critical details, but it's nothing to be worried about, as the process remains identical year after year. She also confirms that the academy doesn't care about your age or gender, your nationality or social class. In other words, they quite literally don't give a single flying fuck if you're an attack helicopter or not. They don't even care enough to know your names. Only the candidates who are destined to pass will be asked for further information. But for the vast majority of examinees here, it doesn't matter. Professor Ariel even confirms it's fine if they offer a fake name, once again proving the academy simply doesn't care. Trouble finds our boy again, because he showed up without his sword today, and yet he's placed in the fencing course. It makes him question the system's legitimacy. Professor Ariel hilariously continues, stating that she assigned each person a course based solely on her looks. I know she's supposed to be perceptive or something, but it's just funny how 1 minute ago she was talking about discrimination, and then she goes on to say this. Ariel is fine with correcting course details in case she got them wrong. Even the examinees think it's impossible to assign a course based on sight alone, especially when there are so many of them. They strongly suspect the academy must have investigated them beforehand, so that's how they know. And the possibility of mind-reading magic also comes up. Professor Ariel doesn't address any of their concerns. All she's noticing is how no one is complaining about the assigned course. So next, she decides to reveal everyone's exam schedule. The details are imprinted on the ticket at once. Gray is nervous because he's scheduled to have his exam on the first day, not allowing him any time to let his arm heal. Ariel reveals that this exam will only be conducted once and it will decide everything. If a candidate is late, immediate disqualification will be the only outcome. She also reminds them that their schedules are strict and won't be manipulated or disputed upon request. It's bad news for Gray, who is struggling with his recovery. He's begging for his body to pull a miracle and heal him tomorrow. The next day arrives, and what do you know? His arm hasn't healed in the slightest. He has no choice but to take the exam. Despite his condition, Gray's examining number is called, and he frustratingly steps forward. He tries to calm himself down, desperate to remain optimistic about the situation. Assessing his left arm, he finds no apparent issues there. He can even move his right arm, but only if he exerts enough strength. His current strategy is to sharply observe the examiner's moves and uncover a winning strategy from them. He's watching a match between a candidate and an examiner. The applicant blindly rushes to attack, but by the end of his furious assault, the examiner is completely unfazed and casually stands, waiting for his next move. The candidate drags his sword for yet another slash, but even that strike is helpless. It gets blocked. And not only that, the examiner deflects his blade before sending him flying with a final, crushing blow, with his body hitting the ground. The examiner declares the exam result, instructing him to exit the venue. Now, you guys might be thinking that maybe Gray has found something, but the hilarious part is how this man literally gives up and accepts that he's about to get his ass cooked. His number is called to step into the arena. Gray reflects on his chances, realizing that he clearly can't beat an examiner who just annihilated a candidate even bigger than him. Inside the arena, our boy is granted the freedom to make the first move. Despite that, he fully understands that this battle will be one-sided. Even then, he's got to make some kind of impression. The fight begins with Gray rushing to strike. He remembers his master's advice, who told him to make use of his entire body to deliver a potent slash, rather than just using his arms. Channeling her advice and emotion, he thinks the only way he can cope with the loss of his right arm is to use his other muscles instead, and so he delivers the first swing, which the examiner easily dodges. Even now, Gray finds himself struggling to fight in his usual style. After all, even though he's trying to make up for his right arm, it still doesn't change the fact that he's at a major disadvantage. Here the examiner retaliates by trying to cut him down, but to Gray's astonishment, the sword is moving far too slow. It's as if he can read its trajectory without having to rush. So our boy actually blocks the attack successfully, still feeling the weight of the examiner's force behind the attack at the same time. He judges that the examiner's technique isn't as refined as Saria, so if he can just focus on the techniques he learned from her, there's a chance he may be able to exploit an opportunity and carve an opening. With that strategy in mind, Gray rushes in full force in an effort to overwhelm the instructor. Oh, and the instructor is actually being pushed back. His speed is his own demise. Gray finds himself becoming confident, realizing that he can easily take down this examiner. The words of his master flash through his mind again. Their blades clash once more. But Gray overwhelms his opponent with a full deflect. Ready to finish the battle with his new confidence, Gray continued his relentless assault, while the instructor tried his hardest to wrestle control of the pace. Although our boy had seen through the opponent's technique, neutralizing it with a handicap is still a tough task. He exploited the speed gap and snuck a straight stab only to get curved. Difference in raw power was simply too great-breaking. The instructor's form is easier said than done with two hands, let alone one. With that said, Gray's aggression was turning the nerd's movements rougher bit by bit. It would be a bit risky, but he can push his luck here. With a clear plan in mind, Gray let the instructor push him to the edge of the stage, exposing a massive gap in defense as expected. Glasses took the bait and pounced for a finishing blow. The instructor fell for the oldest trick in the book. He made a wide open swing as Gray anticipated. The young warrior adjusted his stance and let the swing come. Nothing is more likely to expose an opening than a reckless and greedy push. A big and predictable swing was precisely what he needed to use his speed advantage. In a flash, he exploited the instructor's exposed flank. But no matter the power disparity, A sneak attack from behind is indefensible. Just milliseconds from delivering the winning thrust, the referee intervened, signaling the match's end. Gray reined himself in, lowering his blade. The match was over, but it felt agonizingly brief. With the exam's time limit expired, the referee declared the fight a draw. The young man ground his teeth in frustration. He had failed, despite all his grueling effort. He couldn't clinch the win. He gripped his trusty blade for a moment, then slowly loosened his hold. Gray walked away from the stage, accepting the outcome with grace. He had done his absolute best. If he couldn't even defeat an instructor, injury or not, his lofty goals were further than he imagined. But looking on the bright side, his arm should fully heal by next year, allowing him to be 100% for a retake of the entrance exam, no matter the result. This was a valuable, growth-inducing experience. A week has passed since Gray narrowly missed his win against that glasses-wearing instructor. Today, the World Union Academy faculty gathered in meeting room 53 to discuss the entrance exam results. A white-haired elder, Gramps, began the meeting by inviting his colleagues to freely express their thoughts on this year's batch. Immediately, groans and complaints filled the room. For this year, they had devised a method where every professor observed the exams simultaneously. It was rather inefficient and tedious, to say the least. Of course, some professors actually liked the format. They couldn't afford to overlook promising talent, simply for the faculty's convenience. After all, Graham skillfully steered the discussion away from the exam system and back to the hopeful students. Starting with the swordsmanship course, he summoned magical recordings of every examinee to evaluate those who passed. One last time. Naturally, those who decisively beat the examiner passed. Those who couldn't seal the deal would be evaluated based on the qualities they displayed and how they endured those 15 minutes. After minutes of intense clashing, besides those who completely wiped the floor against their instructors, they narrowed down the standout candidates to numbers 5, 217, and 753. Everyone agreed to draw the line with just those three. Adding more inferior talents would mean those poor kids wouldn't be able to keep up in class. No one opposed the line drawn. So, the successful candidates for the swordsmanship course were confirmed and locked in, or so was supposed to be, until a playful voice brought up candidate number 513. Gray Lee. It came from none other than the enigmatic, red-haired Professor Ariel. Since she mentioned an unfamiliar number, the other professors pulled up the footage. They had to admit that, given another second, the young man would have likely won. But he relied on setting up traps, just to beat an examiner. The academy might prove too difficult for him. Those with trained eyes for swordsmanship could see the solid technique, the lack of power, and the clear mismatch from the start until the end. In conclusion, the professors of the swordsmanship course dismissed the idea of accepting candidate 513 to the academy. While they were busy mocking the kid's flaws, Professor Ariel looked at her co-workers like they were dumbass bums. Every single person in this room watched the footage, yet not a single one of them noticed what she did. If everyone's this blind, maybe the exam's format really is a waste of time. The day after the final deliberation, the examinees were called back to the town square. They were tasked to gather at 11 in the morning. Tensions were high, and everyone was hoping to get the coveted acceptance. The time had finally come. An academy representative loudly announced that 6 candidates had passed the swordsmanship course. Everyone held their slips and prayed to be one of the 6. The first ones called were candidates number 5 and 217. Immediately, their paper slips burned to nothing. Next up were candidates 432, 615, 753, and 925. That's it. Out of hundreds, only 6 were skilled enough to get accepted into the world's most prestigious training institute. Gray arrived today with a glimmer of hope, only to be utterly crushed by the harsh reality that he might not be good enough. The successful candidates were instructed to cross the bridge and complete their enrollment procedure by the end of the day. Those who passed were naturally giddy and excited to embrace the life of an elite. Those who flopped stared down in disappointment, wallowing in their failure. With the swordsmanship course out of the way, The representative surprisingly announced that one examinee had been selected by the divine I special admission. Of course, it's none other than candidate number 513, gray mother-freakingly. His paper slip burned a different shade than the ones that came before him. The bright blue flame inevitably attracted everyone's attention, and just when he thought he'd have to train and rehabilitate his injury for another year, Gray was given a pass. Other candidates around him mockingly laughed upon hearing the mention of the divine I special admission. Gray had no idea what he'd just gotten into. This was the first time he'd ever heard about this divine I business. Almost everyone saw this as a bullshit admission, just a way to sneak someone unworthy through a back door, a clear sign of World Union Academy's decline. Hearing the vitriolic chatter around him, Gray did not like the sound of being called a backdoor student. He wondered how he was even selected when he didn't have any relevant connections. His master could not possibly have this kind of pull in the academy. While the failures were busy mocking, the one guy admitted through the divine eye, a bald old hermit, scolded them for disrespecting a long-standing tradition. The way the bald hermit saw it, this admission was an honorable category that had produced countless heroes for over a century now. As expected, complete failures. They even mocked the hermit, calling him behind the times. Sure, the divine I was once hailed as the birthplace of heroes, back in its heyday, but not anymore. Recent Divine I candidates included Amy White, Bella Albright, Leek Muller, and Jacob Bloomfield. These four shared one major thing in common. Everyone saw them as complete and utter failures. But we've already heard those names because in the near future, Amy White will rise to become the Sword Saint. Bella Albright will become the Great Sage, and Jacob Bloomfield will take up the mantle of the Divine Archer. These three will reach the absolute apex of their craft, becoming the main force against the Liquidator. And now, Graylee's name will be mentioned. Alongside these legends, those who passed were welcomed and given uniforms to change into. The entrance ceremony was about to begin, and the rookies had to assemble in the plaza in front of the main office. Gray tried on his new drip, and it was a perfect fit. His black blazer, adorned with a golden academy crest, looked sharp as hell. He went from feeling defeated to feeling dapper alongside his batchmates. When they reached the plaza, some of the rookies were immediately confused because there was nothing there. Their confusion was cleared up when an academy staff member ran towards them, an apologetic expression on his face. He explained that there had been a slight delay setting up the ceremony due to a mix-up. Thankfully, it wouldn't take long to fix. To do so, the rookies just needed to step back a little farther so the setup could be put in place. The rookies followed the staff members' instructions and watched with skepticism. Mr. Staff kneeled down and started tinkering with the ground. After a little bit of preparation, he touched the floor and activated a massive magic circle. In the blink of an eye, out of nowhere, hundreds of seats arranged in a coliseum style emerged from the magic circle. The rookies were absolutely flabbergasted. They had never seen magic of this scale before. In just a few seconds, the plaza had transformed into a proper arena, complete with seats and a stage. Mr. Staff apologized. He apologized for the delay once more and instructed the rookies to grab any seat they wished. Still reeling from that absurd display of magic, they promptly followed suit. A few of the more knowledgeable rookies instantly recognized the use of teleportation magic to literally manifest an entire arena out of thin air. Gray quietly snagged a seat in the middle row. He figured this had to be the Academy's way of hosting a grandiose entrance ceremony right next to the school building. They're basically just flexing the sheer power of the World Union Academy. Once everyone had settled down, other rookies remarked that the number of seats seemed a bit excessive. After all, only 30 of them were currently in attendance, yet there were hundreds of empty seats. Well, that's because, true to its name, the World Union Academy, as its name suggests, this institute gathers the cream of the crop from all corners of the world. If you just glance up at the sky, You'll instantly grasp what that truly means. Dozens of airships and Grand Dragon carriages flew overhead, blanketing the sun. Looking up, Gray recognized the largest magic airship as the legendary Strato Queen. He had once boarded this colossal beast, back when he was merely cannon fodder for the Liquidator Subjugation Squad. It truly lives up to its formidable reputation, bringing out something so utterly imposing for a mere entrance. Ceremony is just another way to flex on the newbies. The world. Union Academy sure knows how to flaunt its power. Once every ship had safely touched down, students who had aced the strict entrance exam in their own corners of the world stepped out. They quickly filled the remaining seats, packing the stands. With everyone finally gathered, it's time to get started. The staff member who conjured the arena signaled the start of the rest of their lives. After all the flashy displays of influence, the entrance ceremony proceeded with a surprisingly brief speech, courtesy of the headmaster. Gray, however, was already feeling a little bored in his seat, even though he's entering the most prestigious academy in the entire world. This entire ceremony felt like just another tedious assembly. Next up, the headmaster called the top students to the stage, from each course to the podium. The guy next to Gray dramatically rose to his feet. That blonde? His name is Leon Hart, the top student of the entire swordsmanship course. As he confidently strode down the stairs, whispers about his incredible feat of instantly defeating an examiner immediately began to circulate. Some even claimed this rookie was already on par with the professors when it came to swordplay. Leon Hart Apias even looks like a spy tasked with forming a fake family alongside an assassin and a little girl who can read minds. Gray wasn't impressed, but he was a little curious. Before launching into his speech, Leon Hart made sure he was allowed to speak freely and from the heart, once given the green light. He then turned to his fellow rookies with a sharp, piercing gaze. He began his speech by lodging a formal complaint with the academy. First, he congratulated his peers, who were admitted the proper way. He considered it a huge honor to be among the current generation's elite. Leon Hart hopes that they all graduate as individuals capable of making meaningful contributions to the world. For that very reason, they must work together. He eagerly anticipates the day he and his peers soar as proud students of the prestigious World Union Academy. With that pleasantry out of the way, he pointed out there was someone among us, someone who didn't deserve to be in this plaza at all. He directly aimed this accusation at Professor Ariel, who oversaw the Divine Eyes special admissions. She was quite shocked to be called out by a freshman on the very first day. Professor Ariel asserted that every single student present had passed the rigorous exam. They might not be as dominant as Leon Hart, but they proved they rightfully belonged. Both curious and fascinated, she asked the cocky rookie why he was running his mouth like a little bitch. Without mincing words, Leon Hart candidly brought up the mystery candidate, who was admitted through an obsolete backdoor system. Like everyone else, he viewed the Divine Eyes special admission as merely a way to sneak underqualified students into the academy. Leon Hart, he roared that the specially admitted students should just reveal themselves, return this honorable uniform, and leave in shame. His words, full of conviction and decisiveness, seemed to sway the other rookies. Meanwhile, the one being singled out was desperately trying to avoid attention. Thankfully, that hostile overachiever doesn't recognize Gray. If he just stays silent, he shouldn't get into trouble, right? Professor Ariel had to step in and defuse the tension, praising this year's batch for their spirited energy. Refusing to back down, Leon Hart doubled down on his strong opinions about admitting students via an outdated special course. Growing increasingly annoyed with Blondie, Professor Ariel ominously asked if he was truly confident that he could defeat the student she handpicked for her course. Leon had to take a few steps back upon feeling the immense pressure from the enigmatic professor. He tried to stammer a reply, but the words wouldn't come. Gritting his teeth and composing himself, Leon Hart confidently answered that he could utterly trash that unqualified student. Ariel was already expecting such a reply. She likes boys with attitude, so she proposed a wager. She would willingly put her job on the line And that kid's entire future in this academy at stake. Ray doesn't like the sound of that bet at all. Leon Hart asked if this wager would be a straight-up brawl with a special admission kid. But Professor Ariel wouldn't do something so boring and boorish. She's also certain that if her boy goes all out, little Leon would end up dead in a ditch. As an educator, she can't possibly put a promising student's life at risk. Her words were cut right through Leon Hart's pride like a hot knife through butter. If she was trying to rage bait him into making a bet, it certainly worked. Professor Ariel proposed that they make the wager about monster subjugation instead. That way, it'll be a little safer for every party involved. Besides, she knows that Leon Hart excels at fighting monsters more than against humans. The details are simple. Both participants must kill the monsters. She picks his targets each round. The target monster will increase in strength. Whoever gives up first and fails to subjugate the target loses. If her son loses, she'll gladly retire from her esteemed position as professor and expel every special admissions student under her care. But if little Leon loses, he'll have to do whatever she says. I know many of you would eagerly accept being the redhead professor's slave in a heartbeat. Before agreeing, Leon Hart asked what the first target monster would be. Although he's confident he can handle and take down any opponent, he'd rather not get caught up in some weirdness. After a little deliberation, she came up with the perfect first target. She wants the head of an ogre general on her desk. If it's too easy for little Leon, she'd gladly increase the difficulty. But based on the crowd's reaction, there's no need for that. While everyone was calling her demands over the top, Gray was trying to figure out why she'd pick an ogre general specifically, a monster he had already slain. Leon, on the other hand, banged his fist on the podium. He vehemently argued that an ogre general is not a monster that someone can subjugate on a solo run. Seeing Blondie protest, she lowered the difficulty and set the time frame for the whole year. Little Leon still refused to play along. He argued that if someone could single-handedly kill a disaster level monster with just a year of training, people wouldn't suffer if they were to go through with this absurd bet. This pussy demanded a more realistic target. Then it clicked. This clever woman deliberately chose a monster no one can defeat, so they could end the bet without a clear winner. Since he kept on complaining, Professor Ariel relented and added one more stipulation to the bet. If it results in a draw, little Leon wins. In other words, if her son fails to defeat the ogre general within a year, she will gladly step down and expel all her special students. With all these stipulations, to give Leon as much advantage as possible. He'll look like a pussy if he still refuses. Knock it off, Leon. Leon needs to realize he's being completely played right now. The outcome of this is already decided. But he was utterly swept up in the professor's manipulation, forced to accept a wager that seemed absolutely airtight. Just for the record, he specifically asked if a weakened or injured ogre general would count. Of course, it goes without saying that the monster had to be in its natural fighting form to seal the deal. The eye beneath the professor's monocle glowed as her magic began forming a contract. Every single detail had been meticulously listed and imprinted into the magical contract itself. All young Leon had to do was sign it if he was truly ready, with the entire faculty and every other freshman as witnesses. He willingly signed his name upon the arcane document. After finalizing the deal, he hesitantly asked if the kid admitted through the back door could seriously win. Professor Ariel didn't even bother giving him a straight answer. The other professors just watched from their seats, seemingly quite used to the old red-haired raccoon's shenanigans. They all saw her as a mage well past her prime, bored and just doing random stuff for kicks and giggles. In his seat, Gray sighed in defeat as the bet to determine his future was officialized, now completely out of his control. He also noticed that she had deliberately worded the stipulations to include the ogre general he'd killed within the time frame. This bet was a done deal the very moment it began. Professor Ariel had played Leon and everyone else, and Gray was the only one who truly saw it. She sure plays dirty, but having Someone like that in your corner is a massive boon. After the bet fiasco, the entrance ceremony finally concluded, and the rookies were funneled into their first lecture, The Basics of Magic. The professor in charge of the class acknowledged that it was a bit surprising to start a lecture on the very first day of classes. He wanted his students to get used to this rigorous pace. In this academy, they couldn't afford to waste a single day. Today, they would start with the most basic of basics, the simple utilization of magic. Within a human's body lies an invisible energy called ether. You can manipulate the magic circuits in your body and tap into untold amounts of power. Gray was initially afraid he wouldn't be able to keep up with the classes, but this first lecture looked manageable. He'd already heard the same explanations back at the subjugation boot camp. Nevertheless, he was unlucky with his class assignment. Out of all the introductory magic classes, he ended up in the same class as Leonhard Appius. If people find out he's the hated divine, I's special admissions student, he can kiss his piece goodbye. While he was lost in thought, the professor noticed and singled him out for looking bored by the lecture. The professor felt offended that a rookie was looking away less than 5 minutes into his introductory course. Gray immediately apologized for his wandering gaze. Still, he found it weird that the professor singled him out, even though he was all the way at the very back of the lecture hall. The professor escalated the situation and demanded a demonstration from a distracted student. If he looks bored in an introductory class, that must mean he can use basic magic, right? Gray wasn't easy to bully. Respectfully, he insisted that he specializes in swordsmanship. He thought it would be fine if he couldn't use magic. The professor barked that even if you use a sword in a real fight, a fighter still needs to learn the basics to coordinate with an allied mage. Learning the basics of magic and grasping how it feels is the least a swordsman can do. At that moment, Gray remembered hearing the same thing from the boot camp lectures. In that case, today's lecture might conclude with the same spell. To confirm, he asked if today's lecture is aimed at learning the simple, yet effective ether bullet. Since he knows the name, the professor assumed that he could use it. Gray thanked the god for the hellish boot camp he had to grind through. Since this would be a good opportunity for a proper demonstration, the professor decided to make this a one-on-one match and called this year's top swordsman, Leon, up to the stage. Blondie gladly stood up and paid his hats off to the professor, who then explained that he was trained in both sword and magic before even starting school, so it might be a bit risky for a normie to go up against him. The professor insisted that no matter the skill gap, ether bullets are non-lethal, so there's no need to hold back. In addition, he revealed that Gray is this year's Divine Eye student, knowing how much Leon despises the nameless backdoor student. Every student in the lecture hall turned to Gray, committing his face to memory. This was a setup from the very start. He couldn't even get through the day without being doxxed by a freaking professor. That old fart deliberately revealed his identity with nefarious intent. Hearing that he had a chance to shoot a literal bullet through the guy he hated, Leon readily accepted to show a backdoor baby the ropes. This was an opportunity to show an unqualified outsider what World Union Academy really is. With his veins popping out in rage, he demanded that Gray step the F*** down. This is not how our boys' first day was supposed to go. On the stage, they stood opposite each other while the stir professor explained the rules. He would give a signal and both parties would shoot ether bullets at their opponent. Gray had only spent a few days learning basic magic at the boot camp. Sure, the professor said the bullets weren't lethal, but that didn't mean they wouldn't hurt. As soon as the go signal was given, Leon Hart gathered a hefty amount of ether in his hands, determined to show the difference in strength between a real and fake student, pushed to the corner and forced to protect himself. Gray also gathered and manipulated his ether, throwing his prior knowledge into one desperate attempt. The whole lecture hall fell silent when they laid eyes upon a massive black hole, threatening to swallow a teeny little bullet. Both Leon and Gray were flabbergasted. Neither of them expected this shit. As expected, the tiny ether bullet was completely consumed by the raging black hole. Leon's fear was evident in his eyes as the obviously lethal spell inched closer to him in a panic. The professor raised his hand, trying his absolute hardest to avert the worst-case scenario. Using his own magic, a golden barrier blocked the seemingly relentless advance of the anomalous ether bullet. It managed to blunt most of the force, driving the attack, but it was a very close call. He made the mistake of letting up, and the golden barrier started showing dangerous cracks under pressure. Eventually, the ether bullet black hole reached its limit and exploded, shattering the magic barrier into a million little specks of light. The resulting boom threw the lecture hall into chaos. Rookies closed their eyes and braced themselves for impact. As for the target himself, little Leon was knocked down on his ass, screaming bloody murder. Realizing that he messed up, the professor immediately ran towards the swordsmanship courses rising. Start to make sure he's all right. Leon picked himself back up, wiped the dust, and assured the professor that he was fine. After ascertaining Blondie's well-being, the professor turned his attention to the one who almost blew the whole place up. Had the barrier failed to dampen the impact, that abnormal ether bullet could have killed Leon and injured many. Even amongst veteran magic professors, no one could cast an ether bullet that strong in the academy. He desperately wanted to know what the young man did to produce such a destructive output. Gray himself was confused. What he just unleashed was definitely on another level compared to the feeble spell his opponent threw. Could the spell he learned as part of the subjugation squad differ from the one they teach at the academy? He asked the professor if he had messed up in any way, but the geezer was fairly certain that what he shot was definitely an ether bullet. The only glaring difference was the quality of the spell. What Gray just used to juice up the spell was not normal ether. That size and power can only be achieved through the use of super compressed ether. Not a single rookie has ever heard, let alone grasp the concept of super compressed. Super compressed ether is something even seasoned professors struggle to produce and study. Yet this controversial student casually wielded it to revolutionize a basic spell. No one else in this entire academy can replicate that. Suddenly, the students are beginning to feel a mix of respect and a healthy dose of fear for the guy admitted through the divine eye. They're even protesting that Gray should have been enrolled in the magic course. Instead, and as far as he remembers, all spells learned by the subjugation squad were precisely like the one he just unleashed. Yet among the group, Gray was supposedly one of those with no aptitude for it. Still refusing to believe he's using some sort of juiced-up ether, he summoned another ether bullet and insisted that pulling off something like this is totally possible for anyone with enough practice. Much to his confusion, the professor just cackled like a madman in response. And Gray was utterly clueless on what to do, so he just stood there dumbfounded as the professor shifted his tone entirely. At the start of class, he was blatantly hostile. Now, he's desperately trying to recruit the special admission student into the magic course. Gray respectfully declined the enthusiastic invitation. He'd always been told he had no talent for magic, so he couldn't possibly see himself getting into it now. The professor found this refusal utterly preposterous. If a young man who can produce super compressed ether through sheer compression is talentless, then everyone else should just quit magic. He even went as far as dubbing Gray an unparalleled prodigy. Even by the Academy's standards, whoever who said that the kid had no talent for magic must be smoking some illegal substances. The rookies watched the entire scene unfold in stunned silence. They saw how the strict professor transformed into a completely different person as he desperately tried to convince Gray to shift into the magic department. From his perspective, it would be a huge loss for the world if Gray didn't pursue magic. Hell, it would be a crime against the arcane. With all this glazing coming his way, all the young man could do was laugh at the utter absurdity. He then remembered hearing the term ether compression technique once before. It was a clear day at boot camp when one of the heroes was giving a lecture. She recounted how people used to be unaware that OD, also known as life force, even existed. Because of this knowledge gap, casting proper magic was incredibly difficult. One had to continuously compress their ether within their bodies to achieve the desired effect via spell. This primitive method could only gather a tiny bit of OD. The lecturer, Miss Bella Albright, the great sage and strongest mage of the future, found the magic they practiced just a decade ago utterly laughable. Gray then asked the professor if he'd ever heard of OD. The question completely stumped the old man. He wasn't familiar with the term at all. Judging by that reaction, it seems the world still hasn't discovered this revolutionary magic concept yet. If that's truly the case, then the basic knowledge Gray learned in the subjugation squad can be considered knowledge from the future. He finally realized he must be careful not to leak this kind of information. For one last time, he firmly refused the incessant offer to transfer to a different course. His true love was the sword, so he would have to pass. The professor sighed in defeat, helplessly, accepted the young man's decision to stick with his blades. But he also left Gray an open-door invitation to shift apartments whenever he felt like it. Feeling a headache coming on, the young man awkwardly thanked the animated geezer for the generous offer. After that impressive demonstration, both participants were asked to return to their seats. The professor promised he would never chide Gray anymore during class. In fact, he wouldn't mind if the kid left whenever he got bored. The professor believed that this baby stuff was far too basic for a prodigy like Gray. Gray had previously descended the stairs subjected to hostile glares. Now he ascended with reverence from the professor and his peers. Meanwhile, his victim was still standing frozen on the ruined stage, his face flushed, and his heart pounded wildly for Lord Gray. He didn't notice Lionheart glancing down there, but Gray definitely felt a shiver crawl up his spine. After his very first lecture, he got a personal note from Professor Ariel, asking him to meet her in her office after classes. He was basically summoned completely out of the blue. It would be trouble if old Professor Carlos were behind this sudden summons. After wandering around for a few minutes, he finally found the office door that bore the mark of the divine eye. He was about to knock, but the door softly opened, gently letting him in, taking the unlocked door as an invitation. Gray respectfully entered, uttering a respectful greeting. Before he could finish his sentence, he sensed a sharp blade hurtling towards him from the side. Gray's reflexes automatically kicked in as he drew his sword to defend. The grip was a bit unorthodox, but got the job done in a pinch. He was able to sweep the sneak attack and the attacker away. The attacker swatted clear. Gray realized he'd moved purely on instinct this time around. He wanted to confront the assailant. It was just a blue-haired young woman who couldn't even grip her sword properly. Upon closer look, Gray realized he knew this girl all too well. This shorty will become an unshakable pillar of humanity and hope in the future. Gray's attention was then directed to the desk in the back of the office, and the woman sitting on it praised his quick response. Professor Ariel was pleased to confirm that her eyes were spot on when she evaluated the young man in the entrance exam. There were two other men in the room, Ariel's fellow professors, who were still skeptical of the new addition to the divine eye. They evaluated Bella's movements as flawless, but her sword was knocked out of her hand way too easily. Hearing the name, Gray's previous life memory of the ultimate mage came rushing back. Who would have thought that the sorceress, looking quite charming in her younger days. Meanwhile, Ariel's still hassling her colleagues to just admit they were wrong, instead of making excuses. In the end, the other professors ponied up, giving their gambling addict co-worker her winnings. They'd observed the split-second exchange at the door and had to admit Gray was here for a reason. Confused and uncomfortable, the young man asked what was happening and why he was called on. Ariel simply explained they were betting on whether the new kid could fend off a surprise attack from Bella or not. Thanks to that, she made some good money today. As thanks, she tossed a portion of her winnings to her new student. He promptly caught the coin and found a glimmering gold piece in his hand. A single gold coin is practically a small fortune. Although they admittedly lost the wager, The other professors also brought up a glaring detail they'd missed in the entrance exam. From that exchange earlier, they became certain the young man deliberately avoided using his dominant arm to defend. It was almost as if he was trying to protect an immobile arm. The most likely explanation for that quirk would be an injury, but rather than an apparent physical injury to the muscles that any professor would see through. This kid is suffering from a deeper kind of wound. A simple injury would not cause someone to tense up in such an unfamiliarly hostile ambush. Gray was surprised that the professors had deduced so many details correctly just by watching him draw his blade to defend. While they are educators in the most prestigious educational institution for a reason, though they were slower to notice compared to Ariel, they still inferred a clear picture. With that being said, Ariel shooed her co-workers away now that she had their money. They missed out on a rare find, and she won't give Gray up for now. The professors would gladly admit that the kid has potential, but if that wound doesn't heal and continues to fester, Gray will remain as the guy who failed to meet the academy. It was nothing special, yet accepted all the same. He absolutely hated the menacing thought of that professor's tongue being cut off. With the skeptical professors finally gone, only Ariel and her students remained inside. With those nuisances finally out of the way, it was time to get to the real reason for this summons. Her real reason for calling him was to discuss magic. After serving some aromatic tea, Professor Ariel then reiterated the events she heard unfolded in Professor Carlos's class. She'd found out from the man himself. That persistent idiot had stormed right into her office, demanding the new kid's transfer to the magic course. Naturally, she declined such a ridiculous request. Through her discerning eyes, Gray would become a truly terrifying beast, wielding a sword rather than magic. Upon removing her monocle to elaborate on what she meant by that, Gray was stunned. Professor Ariel doesn't see any signs of genius in magic compression. He doesn't even show signs of deep practice with magic at all. Gray felt more than a little unsettled after getting scanned and read like an open book by that bizarre. Seeing is lying would be utterly useless in this situation. Gray admitted that her speculations were spot on. Curious, she then gently asked if he'd be willing to share the trick. Used to conjure that black hole ether bullet, she promised complete discretion and a reward in exchange for the valuable info. She truly wanted to know about this promising concept for Bella's sake. While sipping her tea, Gray's tongue nearly slipped and called young Bella by her future title. Professor Ariel called the young woman a pure genius when it comes to magic theory, yet without the means to wield what she can theorize. For some inexplicable reason, she has no capacity to use ether compression, let alone the mythical super compression. Based on some loose intel from the future, he knew Bella Albright was a late bloomer. Her lack of practical talent must be why Ariel set this meeting up after hearing about the super compressed ether bullet that nearly killed Leon. If there's a way to use super compressed ether without that clunky internal compression, it would be a total game changer. Professor Ariel is desperate for a solution. She refuses to see one of her girls sent off to Professor Bradley. Everyone in the future would come to know that accursed name. It's simply impossible not to be aware of the extremely infamous grade A bastard. He conducted countless independent human experiments, all for the sake of advancing his field, murdering many in the process. On top of that, he would cause cataclysmic magical disasters that claimed the lives of tens of thousands. Yes, Professor Bradley is history's worst magical criminal in existence. In this current era, the deranged, mass-murdering magical terrorist hasn't been caught yet. If Bella can't create super compressed ether, by the end of the year, she'll be sent to the deranged professor to undergo high-risk surgery. Anyone with an ounce of common sense would see this as a bad idea. Professor Ariel couldn't agree more. Though the surgery is under the pretense of enhancing magical abilities, it's just blatant human experimentation. With no certainty, it hasn't been made public yet, but she's already hearing rumors of the lunatic's inhumane crimes. Some victims have died, while others were left broken beyond all hope. Bella chimed in that although it's dangerous and scary, she'll be expelled by the end of the year if she doesn't produce any results. In all honesty, Professor Ariel would rather have her girl just quit magic and the academy for good than have that perv mess with Bella's body. Gray quietly deliberated. He possesses magic theories that don't even exist yet. If he shares something so drastic, the course of history will completely veer off track. He watched young Bella, clenching her fists in frustration and fear. Gray remembered his last moments facing the liquidator. That frustration, fear, and hopelessness are way too familiar. He was just cannon fodder, trained to fall in one shot. A helpless spectator while the so-called heroes, those destined to save the world, were cut down like fresh meat, knowing the future that awaited him if he didn't act fast. Why wouldn't he want to change the course of history? That absolute nightmare people called the future was much better off changed. By the time his tea cooled, he'd agreed to teach Bella as best as he possibly could. She'd be wielding super compressed ether in no time. After the meeting, the trio headed to the arena as the sun started to set. Gray whipped out the chalkboard and tried his best to articulate what he'd learned from the boot camp lectures. After squeezing out every bit he could recall, he asked the girls to keep this privileged information strictly to themselves. Information leaks wouldn't be a problem, since the professor drafted a magic contract beforehand. Those who break the contract shall die. After giving them the rundown, Gray asked what they thought about his theory. Just learning about the concept of OD alone was enough to blow Professor Ariel's mind, but the magical knowledge he revealed was even more absurd. Bella praised his explanation as brief yet perfectly organized. She felt like she was listening to a lecture on magic from hundreds of years in the future. With Bella simply hearing and absorbing the info dump, the history of magic had advanced by 100 years in this very room. She kept gushing about advancing magic by a century. But Gray himself learned all these basic concepts from the grown-up sorceress just 10 years from now. It's a testament to her genius. There was a ton of information that even Professor Ariel failed to properly judge and grasp. So she deferred to her little magic prodigy. According to Bella's rough estimation, there's a good chance that the theory is sound. None of the concepts contradict the current magic theory the world runs on, but the quickest way to find out for sure is to test it out. That's why they occupied the arena in the first place. And if the theory holds water, the spell Bella quickly whipped up on the go should work. Holding a staff in her two hands, she put her complete trust in Gray's teachings, finally unleashing her full power. And that doesn't sound like a good thing at all. If he remembers correctly, Bella Albright's strength is rumored to be capable of burning an entire city down in an instant. She's practically a weapon of mass destruction. Moreover, she was infamous for having no proper control over her powerful magic output. Today must be the day he witnesses that legendary display of dominance. Even Bella herself was shocked by what she'd just kicked off. A gigantic blaze of scorching fire shot out from the arena's center, escaping and soaring into the clouds. Gray tried to warn her against this reckless idea, but it was too late. The pillar of flame stood tall, with a young mage at its foundation, holding up an imposing magic circle. This overwhelming power stood at the pinnacle of magic in his past life. If Bella hadn't taken control of the spell a split second earlier, he would have been swallowed by the blaze. That fine elemental manipulation literally saved his life. Oblivious to other people's fear, Bella was beaming with joy. She finally did it. She bridged the gap between her theoretical and practical talents. Pushing herself even harder, she proceeded to tame the flaming pillar, molding it into the shape of a roaring, fiery dragon. For the first time in her life, she found magic fun. She was swept away by the moment and quickly gassed herself out. The fire petered out, and she felt the drawback of her test. Right away as her ether reserves dried up, her legs gave up and she lost consciousness. Her staff dropped to the floor, and so did her body. Worried, Gray ran up to the unconscious girl while the professor told him to chill out. This collapse was a classic case of ether depletion. All Bella needs is a little bit of rest. and she'll be back to 100% in no time. Hearing that assuaged Gray's worries. Still, even Ariel was astounded by the marvelous display of magical talent the young woman displayed. She might be the only person who can put together magic on that scale after learning a new concept. While completely out of it, the napping mage mumbled that it's not her who is amazing, but the theory Gray gave her the tool to easily create her own super compressed ether. Well, it was a tool she was supposed to develop in the future. Ariel sighed in relief. Bella no longer needs that shady surgery from that arcane criminal. She would gladly curse Bradley off herself. The professor was glad to see the young mage avoid a ruinous path. She's especially glad that she did not lose her magic control through some UN-sanctioned experiment. Although Bradley's special surgeries were proven to increase one's magical output, they come at the expense of control. Exactly how it works is a mystery. It's highly likely that the lunatic found a way to forcibly break a person's limiter. Now it makes sense why the sorceress in the past world was rumored to be an out-of-control weapon of mass destruction in any case. Today's massive progress would not have been possible without Gray's help. The terms of their contract have been fulfilled. It's the professor's turn to fulfill her obligations. Listed on the magic paper, first of all, she promised to do something about his arm. There's a magic spell in her repertoire that might help. Extending her hand out, she summoned countless translucent butterflies. Made of pure ether, they flew all around the arena. As she gently touched her student's hand upon contact, the ether around the area swirled and stirred, coalescing upon the point of connection. For a few seconds, Gray accepted the healing touch openly afterwards. He tried clenching his injured hand and felt a drastic difference in comfort compared to before. He can finally move his dominant hand again. It was a vast improvement with his spirits up. He wholeheartedly thanked the professor for solving one of his biggest problems, not even a magic healing potion could cure his mysterious injury. Yet her light touch did the work. She boasted that her nerves restoring magic shouldn't even be mentioned in the same breath as average magic healing potions. Before they got carried away, she wanted to make sure that he was really back to 100% to put to the test. Gray needs to swing a sword and see for himself. For the first time in ages, he reached for the hilt of his blade with his dominant hand. He drew it in a flash and casually slashed it through the air. Immediately, though, he sensed something alarming, despite his arm's supposed full recovery. To confirm his suspicions, he lowered his stance and went through the full motions of his swordplay to see how it felt. Much to his dismay, his right arm simply didn't move as fluidly as it once did. Professor Ariel had anticipated something like this. She might have perfectly mended his nerves, but her magic alone couldn't mend the wounds in the young man's soul. Gray was baffled to hear her mention the soul. While modern magic knowledge hasn't scientifically proven the soul's existence, Ariel firmly believes it does exist. After all, she can see it with her special eye, hidden beneath that sparkling monocle. It's an all-seeing eye that penetrates everything. Right now, she can see Gray's soul slowly healing itself over time. She theorized that as long as he avoids overexertion, he will naturally recover. He innocently asked if practicing his swordplay would count as overexertion. The professor replied that it wouldn't. He could train normally. Instead, she questioned what kind of swordsmanship he practiced that could damage one's soul so severely. Then again, swordplay fueled by one's soul isn't a new concept. In fact, she knows a certain someone with the exact same capability. Amy White is another student in the Divine, a special admission course. She reckoned there must be some deep connection between her two students. Gray was shaken and utterly confused. Why Professor Ariel would even think that? He hadn't even met the future sword saint in this timeline. Ariel assumed Gray knew Amy based on how he wielded his sword. It gave the distinct impression he'd learned it from that sword nerd. On second thought, however, the professor did notice some slight differences. It felt like the person he learned sword Play was essentially a far more skilled version of little Amy. She estimates that in just a few years, Amy will be just as skilled as Gray's mysterious master. Her deduction abilities are absolutely terrifying. Her keen eye can spot the tiniest details, and she interprets them expertly. Gray asserted he learned to wield a sword at his hometown dojo, which technically wasn't a lie. For now, he desperately needs to change the topic, or risk spilling all his deepest secrets. Back to the subject of damaged souls and swordsmanship. Ordinary techniques simply cannot possibly connect these two intangible concepts. To begin with, she's well aware that Gray has some secret move that can defeat an ogre general, an entire ogre army, and everything around with a single slash. She's already done her homework. All thanks to Gray's absurd accomplishments. The bet she proposed, with little Leon at the entrance ceremony, was practically a free win. Ariel was shown some of the remains left at the scene, and found them to be simply magnificent. Not even the most sophisticated cleaving magic could achieve that level of precision and lethality, that mysterious power within Gray. Whatever it is caused the injury in his soul. She can see it with her own eyes. Ariel can peer directly through his soul and peek at the power leaking through a chained door. Hearing her say that instantly made him a believer. The chained door was the exact imagery he kept coming back to inside his mind. This isn't something one can figure out by mere guesswork. This woman is the real deal. That being said, Ariel had seen power similar to Gray's before. While it wasn't a one-to-one copy, they had a very similar vibe. Curious, he asked if there were other people with similarly mysterious powers to his. She knows of one that fits the description, but she's not 100% sure if they are even human. Professor Ariel called it the Liquidator, the very same Liquidator who ushered in the end of the world. Based on his reaction, she could tell that the kid had heard of them one way or another. Gray's mind was reeling. Why is the Liquidator being mentioned this early in the timeline? The sultry professor. I never expected this young man to be familiar with such an esoteric being. But then again, he understands futuristic magic theory, so it's hardly a surprise. Gray felt a bit awkward getting credit for this revolutionary theory when he merely reiterated what he learned from the real genius. Curious, Ariel pressed him on how much he knows about the so-called Liquidator. Honestly, he doesn't know much, but he's certain the Liquidator is an extremely dangerous threat to humanity. That creature absolutely must be stopped before he gathers more power. Something that needs destroying, no matter the cost. Ariel found his stance a little too extreme, but she agreed the Liquidator posed a real danger. Even so, Bailey and Bradley seems intent on continuing his experiments on this subject. It sounds like the future cataclysmic apocalypse is somehow related to the infamous magic terrorist, as far as Ariel knows. The Liquidator is the very being Balian Bradley is trying to summon. This was news to Gray. No one had ever told him the origin of humanity's enemy. Thinking about it, the Academy in the last timeline served as a focal point of history. The higher-ups acted as if they knew exactly where the Liquidator would appear. There's a high possibility that the World Union Academy itself had a hand in summoning the Liquidator all along. The professor and the secretive freshman agreed this extremely reckless experiment had to be stopped before it got out of hand. Unfortunately, the one running these studies is also a tenured professor. Ariel doesn't have the authority to shut him or his experiments down. She already tried to push the higher-ups to move, but they simply wouldn't listen. Unfortunately, she doesn't have the authority to divulge any more information to a mere student. The bottom line is, unless orders come from above, no one can force Bailey and Bradley to stop his lunacy. Gray was hoping to at least get the names of the academies higher-ups, but that's out of question for now. It looks like the academies leadership is more tangled than he thought. But if he can prove that Professor Bradley is a dangerous criminal, perhaps they could gather enough leverage to change things. In a previous timeline, Balin's illegal experiments cost tens of thousands of lives, and Gray knows exactly where these atrocities are set to occur. There shouldn't be any harm in sharing this crucial information with Professor Ariel. This way, they could catch the maniac red-handed. But she immediately shut down the idea. Entering an academy professor's research facility without permission is considered a heinous crime in itself, and they might have to produce concrete evidence through a different approach without risking prison time themselves. But if Gray can deliver some solid proof right now, that might just change things. If not, then they have no choice but to shelf this idea for the time being. It sounds like Ariel is aware of the possible dangers, but her hands are tied by bureaucracy and academy politics. It's frustrating, but understandable. More importantly, she wants to delve deeper into Gray's mysterious power. She teases that there might be a way to learn how to control that lethal weapon. There's a professor in the academy who specializes in dealing with unknown forces. Gray's case is the perfect puzzle to solve. Professor Heathcote Longfellow is his name. Gray had heard the name before. Heathcote Longfellow was the one who trained the sword saint herself. He's a legendary figure. Ariel knew that this idea would catch the young man's interest. She promised to arrange a private training session with the stoic professor for tomorrow. Gray gratefully accepted Ariel's aid. The very reason he came to the academy was to master this power. After all, he didn't expect to find a solid lead so quickly. Things are finally looking up. The very next day, Gray found himself in close proximity to the stern professor. His first private lesson from Heathcote Longfellow is underway. Ariel certainly worked fast. Gray expected some hardcore training or extensive theoretical lessons. But Professor Longfellow dragged him to the woods, and now they're just running in circles. Still, they remain within the academy grounds, but they're deep inside a thick, dense forest. And while he pondered this pointless running, Professor Longfellow scolded him for letting his mind wander instead of stray thoughts. He needed to pick up his pace. They must run, pushing their bodies to their absolute limits. Longfellow believes the soul's power truly awakens only once every drop of physical strength is burned away. Gray is forbidden from touching his sword until every last iota of his stamina is completely spent. The young man can't see the bigger picture yet. Still, he completely trusts Heathcote's methods. Yet while he's out here running laps, Balian is carrying out inhuman experiments to summon the arbiter of the end. But it's hard to get your mind off that nagging thought. Gray carries the burden of future sight, and it's slowing him down. Nevertheless, he stuck with the training regimen for an entire week. On the 7th day, he was summoned to report back to Professor Ariel. Gray felt a little embarrassed that all he'd been doing was endless running, and just a bit of sword drills at the very end. Admittedly, he felt a slight improvement in strength. Ariel couldn't hold back her amused laugh. She's well aware of Heathcote's bizarre methods. With the report concluded, a messenger politely entered the office. He handed a sealed letter addressed to Professor Ariel. She immediately opened the message, and her expression slowly twisted as she read through the correspondence. By the time she reached the end of the letter, she was frozen in her seat. Worried, Gray asked what was wrong. She wordlessly handed him the letter to see for himself. It would be better that way. It was a letter written by Balian Bradley. The lunatic had received the report regarding Bella Albright's super-compressed ether breakthrough. He insisted that although there's a close resemblance, the young mage hasn't actually achieved the level reported. He therefore refuses to recognize her new ability. So, the surgery contract is still valid, and the surgery will go ahead as planned. This was a preposterous letter penned by a master ragebaiter, pure insanity. Ariel is absolutely furious. It seems Bradley is determined to get his hands on a prime guinea pig, Bella herself. He's trying to force her into a completely unnecessary and dangerous procedure. Unfortunately, the maniac holds all the power. The magic contract Bella signed was airtight. Unless Bradley voids it himself, Bella is forced to choose between expulsion or surrendering her body to a madman. Gray refused to accept that bullshit, and Ariel agreed. This letter lit a fire under her to act, completely disregarding bureaucracy, and she needs Gray's help. She wants to know the location of Bradley's secret lab. It will be risky, but she must expose that bitch as a criminal to make the outrageous contract null and void. Finally, she's ready to get her hands dirty. This is exactly what Gray needs. Gloatingly, he asked why she had changed her mind. Exposing a fellow professor without solid proof on hand poses too high a risk. Well, they're past working within the bounds of the law. She's putting her faith in Gray to protect another one of her precious students. From the very start, her instincts had foreseen this would happen. That Gray had been telling the truth this entire time. It took some time and a blatantly absurd letter to admit it, but Ariel is finally awake. It's time for Gray to lead the way. Guided by knowledge of the future, together, they will bring that psycho's crimes against humanity to light. The Dark Swordsman returns. As far as he knows, that vile laboratory is hidden in the mountains, near the village of Toriul. Professor Ariel vaguely recalls news that one of the other faculty members had been given authorization to construct a lab there. This means those illegal and inhumane experiments have been sanctioned by the Academy. There's no better place to conduct illegal research deep within the mountains of Toriul. Practically speaking, no one would even bat an eye if he stayed there for ages. What's more, the Academy's professors uphold an unwritten rule that forbids them from interfering with each other's projects. However, if they can gather concrete evidence proving that horrific crimes against humanity are indeed being committed, they shouldn't be charged with breaking and entering. As they finalized their plan of attack, Bella knocked on the door, and Ariel let her in. She had just received a letter containing truly ghastly news. Her emotions were in turmoil, overwhelmed by a crushing sense of defeat. Professor Ariel gently took the letter from her hand, assuring Bella that this whole mess would be handled care of one way or another. It sounds like Ariel is planning to confront Varian Bradley all by herself, and Bella simply won't stand for that. With a confident smile, Bella insisted that she could solo that bastard any day of the week. A worried Ariel gave Gray a pleading look, hoping he would intervene. Gray stepped up, pledging to accompany the professor, galvanizing their collective resolve. Bella also volunteered to tag along, not wanting to rely on others to solve her own problems. Ariel, however, still believed she had to move alone. She warned them that Varian was a seasoned professor, and not only that, he's also a lunatic with no regard for human life. If he catches an inexperienced student trying to foil his plans, there's no telling what he might do to them. As the only adult in this conversation, she couldn't possibly risk these students. But Gray saw this as all the more reason why going alone was even more dangerous. He asserted that he could tap into the very power used to take down an ogre general if the need arose. He wouldn't be dead weight. Besides, if something catastrophic happened to Ariel, then the Divine program would undoubtedly be dissolved, effectively expelling Gray and his peers. He would rather have a say in his own future, a choice to decide their own fate. Seeing the fierce determination in their eyes, Ariel couldn't possibly refuse. They made it sound like they'd come anyway, even if she outright forbade them. In that case, she'd agree to make this a team mission. Under one condition, no matter what happens, they must prioritize their own safety first and foremost. Gray and Bella readily accepted the stipulation. After wrapping up some precautionary measures, the trio ventured into the haunting mounds of the Torowell Mountains. Tucked inside and hidden away, Varian Bradley's sprawling private laboratory lay before their eyes. It's hard to imagine what kind of horrors are going on inside those towering walls. Once again, the primary objective of this mission is to gather evidence of criminal activity. Nothing more, nothing less. With distinct rage in his eyes, Gray confirmed they were in the right place. On the other hand, Bella felt apprehension. She was unsure if they could really pull this off without any trouble. Professor Ariel had already done her homework. Varian Bradley should be at the Magic Society's conference right now. The lab should be Varian-free. Still, there's a good chance that the main gate is riddled with all sorts of traps. Just to be safe, they should bust through the sidewall and make their own entrance. Breaking into an academy authorized lab is already a crime, anyway. There's no difference regardless of what method they use. One last time, Ariel gave Bella the chance to go back if she changed her mind. Gripping her staff tightly, she cast all her doubts aside. She asked if the professor was really willing to go through all this trouble for someone like her. Gray interjected and answered that this operation isn't solely for her sake. Stopping Varian Bradley's devious plans is for the world's sake. If they don't do something now, countless people will die and the whole world will suffer. Professor Ariel found his reasoning a little exaggerated, but she agreed that the perverse animal must be stopped. So Bella should just chill and get out of her head. She's not the only one who needs saving. All right, enough talk. Ariel confidently led the way, dragging Bella right along, while Gray ran full throttle right beside them. Reaching the side wall of the towering lab, she calmly activated a fiery spell, multiple explosive streaks of pure flame tore through the concrete with zero resistance. The resulting explosion lit up the entire mountain with a blistering light. You gotta hand it to the professor. She sure knows how to put on an over-the-top show. Gray was the first to peek through the instant entrance, and what he saw inside made his skin crawl. Laid before his very eyes was a long, dark hallway with countless jail cells lining both sides. Inside those cells were emaciated people, chained up and catatonic from extensive torture. Some looked dead, some were missing limbs and bleeding from their infected, open wounds. They knew they'd find something, but they didn't expect it this soon. There's no need to even make an effort to look for incriminating evidence here. The group traversed the long hallway. Every single iron-barred cell was filled with Varian Bradley's victims. So far, Ariel had noted traces of 14 forbidden spells used on the prisoners. That fact alone should convict Varian of serious criminal offenses. There isn't even a need to mention the extensive list of clear human rights violations committed in this place. Eventually, they came across a massive room in the middle of the lab. The floors were caked with old and fresh blood, and at the center, an ominous magic circle could be seen. It looked like some sort of an altar. The initial plan was to get in, get some concrete evidence, then get out. But the kind young sorceress felt compelled to rescue the people trapped in this hellscape. Gray felt a worrying premonition. You shouldn't stay here much longer. A rescue mission would take way too long, and Varian might return before they could even come up with their next move. A ghostly figure emerged from the darkness, and he leisurely walked towards the group as though he was strolling through his private garden. Professor Ariel immediately recognized the man slowly approaching them. It was the man, the myth, the unbelievably hideous mad scientist himself, Varian Bradley. And this dude seriously thinks he has an aura? Gray instantly drew his sword, ready to counter whatever evil Varian was planning next. Bradley smugly revealed he had arranged for a double to attend the conference in his place. He was on the brink of a massive breakthrough in his experiments. After all, the man then boasted about getting his hands on some incredibly fresh materials for an important ceremony. You see, he prefers to use his human lab rats while they're still fresh and breathing. But seeing Professor Ariel and her precious pupils on his doorstep, he decided to pivot and completely change his plans. Ariel's heart pounded with worry for her students. Bella, meanwhile, was paralyzed by sheer primal terror, and Gray was absolutely ready to throw hands at any moment. Tonight's experiment, he reasoned, would yield a far better result if the materials used possessed more magic potential than the average person. Varian had no clue how they discovered his little hell on Earth, but he was sure these three were operating covertly. That meant they never told anyone where they were going. If they all suddenly went missing, not a single soul would know where to look. Whatever twisted thing Varian had in store for them, it wouldn't lead to suspicion. Forget the heinous crimes against humanity. Give this man the electric chair, just for that creepy-ass smile alone. From the sound of his chilling, villainous speech, it was obvious that Professor Varian was itching to turn them into his next lab rats, ones that would push the boundaries of magic itself for a steep price. Since they had already seen all his dirty laundry, they absolutely could not be left alive. He might as well make use of their immense magic potential as best as possible. In the middle of his utterly grandiose monologue, Varian suddenly found a massive fireball hurtling towards his dome. The spell exploded with a fiery, deafening boom that illuminated the desiccated room. And surprisingly enough, the attack didn't come from Professor Ariel. It came from the great sage of the future herself. Looking at Bella Albright's determined expression, it seems her initial fear has vanished. Unfortunately, a sneak attack of this caliber just won't cut it. Professor Varian shielded himself with a barrier just in the nick of time. Even so, he praised the girl's immense potential and magnificent decisiveness. He attributed the discovery of such an exceptional talent to Ariel's divine eye. He'd never really paid close attention to special admissions classes before. Perhaps he should start looking closer at the other recruits in that controversial batch. Nevertheless, a mere academy student trying to assassinate a professor would never work. The gap is simply too wide. Tossing away all her fears, Bella accepted that it would be better to get her hands bloody rather than be killed. She barely missed her chance, though. Worried for her students, Ariel issued the order to retreat. They already have their evidence, and the academy should be able to handle the rest. Professor Varian won't just let them walk away freely. Before they could take one step away, a burning black energy shot out of the deranged professor's scepter. In retaliation, his primary target was Bella. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. Ariel had to move quickly on her feet to take the brunt of the attack with her radiant barrier. With utmost focus, she strengthened the barrier, while the dark energy persisted. Varian haughtily explained that defensive magic is pointless for this gluttony flame, which is one of the prized fruits of his extensive research. The spell conjures a flame so ravenous that it burns and devours defensive magic, turning it into fuel. In theory, it's a perfect spell that cannot be blocked. Its only downside was the required use of some rare biological material to cast. As Varian explained, Ariel's barrier was quickly torn apart and consumed, making the gluttony flame bigger and wilder. She tried to salvage the situation by getting her divine eye involved. Tapping into that mysterious power, this bought her precious time to raise another barrier. The moment the first layer finally crumbled, the second layer bore the full force of the supercharged, forbidden magic. As expected, Ariel's second barrier was rapidly eaten away and utterly absorbed by the flame in mere seconds. Fearing the absolute worst, she hurled a spell memory pouch to Bella and Gray. She figured that if Heathcote ever saw the pouch, he would surely know what to do. But instead of taking the evidence and fleeing, Bella raised a barrier of her own instead. Ariel started to panic. She had already accepted that this might be the end of the line for her. But it didn't have to be for her students. Even so, Bella wasn't keen on the idea of abandoning her professor mid-battle, when she clearly still had some fight left in her. Ariel then reminded them of the promise they had made before this mission. They had all agreed that if anything went wrong, survival must be prioritized above all else. Varian's magic was clearly unnatural. All Ariel could do was buy time with her rapidly degrading defensive spells while still arguing with her student. That defensive spell finally shattered. She felt the painful rebound of her spell breaking, and Bella quickly picked up the slack. Her translucent barrier impressively matched the gluttony flame's power. Bella quickly analyzed Varian's attack and figured it wasn't that strong by itself. It just needed a slightly different kind of defensive magic to counteract it. Seeing his monstrous flames stop dead in their tracks, Varian nearly short-circuited the counter-magic. Theory for this specific spell was known to only a select few. So how could a mere student like her figure it out? Bella nonchalantly answered that a very special someone had recently taught her some groundbreaking new theory. With it, every spell had become exponentially easier to decipher. From the brink of utterly crashing out, Varian went full-on psycho. He instantly suspected someone from his inner circle had betrayed him and furiously demanded to know the traitor's name, teasing him with the most innocent expression imaginable. Bella kept the identity of her mentor a secret. The man who had opened up the world of magic to her was a mere student from the swordsmanship course. He had patiently relayed some truly crazy ideas, with Bella's innate genius and a deep grasp of magical theory. Piecing all the information together came naturally to her. Varian has clearly fallen victim to some successful rage bait. Just look at this man's veins, bro. They're about to pop. Have you ever been so baited that you'd pull out a suspicious bloody crystal to enhance your killing move even further? Crushing the bloody crystal in his hand, the human souls trapped within it rushed out to fuel his gluttony flame even further. At this point, the fire looked more like a sentient beast than an inanimate spell. Varian might be committing crimes against both magic and humanity, but his spell looks cool as hell. Even so, Bella estimates her barrier can hold for a bit longer. She could theoretically extend this standoff infinitely, but her mana reserves won't last for long. At her best, she can probably squeeze out one more minute. With her hands full on defense, Ariel would have to pick up the slack on offense. Using her divine eye, the red-headed professor locked in, seeing the flow of magic clearly. She saw a spot where the flames were particularly thin. If she can project mana outside the barrier, Ariel might be able to break through. She conjured charged strings of mana to freely flow through Bella's ironclad barrier. From her position to Varian's, Ariel had a clear path to a kill shot. Unfortunately, her winding strings of mana were just too puny to muscle through the gluttony flames. They slowly petered out until they were completely snuffed out. Varian laughed at the pathetic counterattack attempt. As far as Gray remembers, Professor Ariel's offensive magic is one of the weakest among the staff. Her specialty lies elsewhere. With the flame's properties, her inherently weak offensive power must have been devoured too. They have to figure out a way to wrap this up quickly. Bella is starting to feel gassed out. Her stance is faltering, and her grip is quivering. The barrier might go down any second now. This is precisely why Ariel tried to get her students to run to safety earlier. With all other options exhausted, it's time for the main event. Gray to take on the burden. Bella couldn't fathom how he'd possibly inflict any damage when there was a raging storm of powerful magic between his sword and Varian. Gray basically scoffed, "Nah, I'd win, Professor." Ariel, reading his intentions, warned Gray against using his mysterious power again. Using it too soon could render his healing arm unrecoverable, or it could even kill him. Nevertheless, dying alone is better than all three of them perishing, isn't it? Besides, they were worrying over nothing. BMC quickly shattered through the gluttony flame, flashing a deadly red light on the other side for Varian to see. The last thing the crazy professor saw was Gray's unpredictably perfect slash mixed with splashes of his own blood. His brain was still trying to figure out what just happened, while his head was neatly separated from his body. Just like that, Professor Varian Bradley was rightfully executed for his litany of crimes. His executioner is the man who's going to change the course of history.